Daniel tossed the divorce papers onto the kitchen table with the same smug confidence he used when he closed a deal, leaning back in his chair as though the whole thing had already been decided. "Either accept her," he said, tapping one finger against the folder, "or sign." For a moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the old wall clock Claire had bought at a flea market 15 years earlier, back when she and Daniel still spent Saturday mornings wandering through antique stalls with coffee and paper cups and Emma asleep in a stroller. Claire looked down at the papers. Then she looked at her husband. Daniel's face was calm, almost bored, but there was a shine in his eyes that told her he was enjoying this. He had rehearsed it, she realized. He had imagined her shock, her tears, her trembling hands. He had pictured himself as the man with all the power, the man who could offer humiliation and call it a choice. "You understand what I'm saying?" he asked, his voice softening in that false, reasonable way he used when he wanted to sound mature while being cruel. "I've been seeing someone. Her name is Vanessa. It's been going on for a few months, and I'm not ending it." Claire said nothing. Daniel sighed as though her silence inconvenienced him. "I don't want to destroy the family," he continued, "but I'm not going to pretend I'm happy living like this anymore. You can stay. We can keep things stable for Emma. You can keep the house, the lifestyle, everything you're used to. But Vanessa is part of my life now, and you need to accept that." Claire slowly pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. For 17 years, she had known the sound of Daniel's voice in every season of their marriage. She had heard him nervous before job interviews, proud after promotions, exhausted when Emma was a newborn, tender when her father died, impatient when bills were tight, and cold when success began hardening something inside him. But she had never heard him sound quite like this. Not guilty. Not ashamed. Entitled. Daniel pushed the pen toward her, its silver body sliding across the polished wood until it stopped beside her hand. "You've been out of the workforce too long to start over easily," he said. "Let's be realistic. You gave up your career for us, Claire, and I respect that, I do. But this is the practical option." The practical option. Claire nearly smiled then, but she held it back. Once she had been Claire Morgan from a regional healthcare network, the woman who could walk into a chaotic administrative department, study the billing delays, staffing problems, compliance issues, and broken communication lines, then build a system that made people breathe easier. She had been sharp, trusted, organized, and ambitious. Then Emma came along, tiny and colicky and perfect, and Daniel's sales career began climbing so quickly that the family needed one steady parent at home. Claire had chosen that role with love. She had packed lunches, scheduled dentist appointments, sat through school conferences, remembered which neighbor was allergic to peanuts, helped Emma through middle school friendship wars, cared for Daniel's mother after surgery, hosted backyard barbecues, balanced the household budget, and kept their pretty suburban life running so smoothly that Daniel eventually mistook her labor for dependency. From the outside, they were enviable. A brick colonial on a quiet street outside Columbus. 2 cars in the driveway. A daughter on the honor roll. Christmas cards with matching sweaters and warm smiles. Daniel in his tailored blazer. Claire with her hand resting lightly against his arm. Emma between them, taller every year. Inside that house, though, Daniel had been disappearing 1 inch at a time. At first, it had looked like ambition. Longer hours, more travel, bigger clients, better suits. Then came the dismissive little jokes at dinner, the way he checked his phone while Claire spoke, the way he stopped asking about her day because he assumed nothing important happened in it. He began correcting her in front of friends. He began calling her too sensitive whenever she reacted to his sharpness. And eventually his absence became so normal that the house felt calmer when he was gone. 6 months earlier, Claire had learned the truth. Not from a dramatic confession, not from a lipstick stain, not from some anonymous message at midnight. It had been a trail of small, ordinary things. A hotel charge that did not match his conference dates. A receipt from an expensive boutique. A sudden password on a phone he used to leave face up on the counter. And then, one afternoon when she saw him downtown with another woman, his hand at the small of her back, his mouth pressed against hers beneath a striped cafe awning. Claire had not screamed. She had not thrown his clothes onto the lawn. She had not called Vanessa or Daniel's office or his mother. She had gone home, made Emma spaghetti because it was Tuesday and Emma had say tea prep, washed the pan, folded a load of towels, and cried quietly in the shower where no one could hear her. Then she got practical. Not vengeful. Practical. The next morning, after Daniel left for what he called a client breakfast, Claire sat in her car outside a family law office for nearly 20 minutes before she made herself go inside. Her hands shook around her purse strap, and she felt ridiculous, like a woman acting in a movie about someone else's life. But the attorney, Margaret Ellis, had kind eyes and a voice like clean linen. She listened without interrupting, took notes, and told Claire the first thing she needed to hear. "Knowledge is not a decision," Margaret said. "Learning your rights doesn't mean you have to file for divorce. It means you stop being afraid of the unknown." So Claire learned. Quietly, carefully, legally. She gathered tax returns, mortgage statements, retirement account summaries, insurance policies, investment records, and household expenses. She reviewed bank statements, not to spy, but to understand the life she had helped build. She documented unusual spending when it appeared. She opened a separate savings account with money she earned herself. She updated old certifications, took online courses after Emma went to bed, and reached out to former colleagues with messages that sounded casual but carried the weight of a woman rebuilding her spine. Soon, small consulting projects came in. A clinic needed help restructuring patient intake. A private practice wanted someone to review administrative workflow. A former supervisor connected her with a temporary contract, then another. Claire worked at the kitchen table while Daniel slept in hotel rooms and told himself she had no options. He noticed none of it. He noticed when his shirts were dry cleaned, when dinner was late, when Emma's report card came in, when the lawn service missed a week. He did not notice the woman across from him becoming financially steadier, legally informed, and emotionally prepared. Now, in the kitchen he believed he controlled, Daniel nodded toward the papers. "I'm giving you a choice," he said. Claire picked up the pen. Daniel's mouth curved in satisfaction, and for one brief, almost merciful second, she saw exactly what he expected. He expected her to hold the pen and break. He expected tears, bargaining, maybe anger because anger would still mean he mattered enough to wound her openly. He expected her to ask how he could do this after 17 years, after Emma, after everything she had sacrificed. Instead, Claire turned to the signature page. She signed her name in steady blue ink. Daniel's smile vanished. "Wait," he said. Claire kept writing. "Claire, wait, don't sign." She finished the final letter, set the pen down, and slid the papers back across the table. Daniel stared at them as if they had changed into something dangerous. For the first time in months, Claire smiled. "I've been waiting for this day for a long time." 6 months earlier, Claire had still been trying to talk herself out of what her instincts already knew. It was not one dramatic discovery at first. It was not the kind of betrayal that arrived fully formed, with lipstick on a collar or a perfume-scented note tucked into a jacket pocket. It came quietly in ordinary pieces, so small that any one of them could be explained away by a busy season, a demanding client, a man under pressure. Daniel started taking more business trips, but only by a day or two at first. He had always traveled some, so Claire told herself not to be suspicious. Then the client dinners stretched later, and later still, until he came home after midnight smelling faintly of restaurant wine and cold outside air, his tie loosened, his face blank with the practiced exhaustion of a man who did not want to answer questions. "Good dinner?" she would ask from the kitchen doorway, wrapped in her robe while the dishwasher hummed behind her. "Long," he would say, already looking down at his phone. "I'm beat." He began carrying that phone everywhere. Into the garage. Into the bathroom. Out to the mailbox. At night, he placed it face down on his nightstand, and if it buzzed, his hand moved toward it before his eyes were fully open. Claire noticed because wives notice things. They notice changes in breathing, changes in posture, changes in the way silence settles into a room. But each time suspicion rose in her throat, she swallowed it down. They had 17 years together. They had Emma. They had a mortgage, Christmas ornaments collected over time, A dent in the laundry room door from when Emma had tried to ride her scooter indoors at 7 years old. They had a history built out of grocery lists and hospital bracelets and school photos and late-night arguments that used to end with apologies. Claire did not want to believe a few strange charges and a guarded phone could mean all of that had become negotiable. Then came the hotel charge. Daniel was supposed to have been in Indianapolis for 2 nights, Monday through Wednesday, but the credit card statement showed a boutique hotel downtown on Friday. When Claire asked about it lightly, giving him every chance to offer a reasonable explanation, he barely looked up from his plate. "Client reimbursement," he said. "Accounting mess. I'll handle it." There was a time when Claire would have accepted that and moved on, but his tone was too quick, too polished, and something in her chest went still. After that, the signs arranged themselves into a pattern. A receipt from a jewelry store tucked carelessly into the center console of his car, a cologne she had not bought him, a shirt from a designer shop he normally dismissed as overpriced. His sudden interest in working out, not for health, but with the restless vanity of a man trying to impress someone who had not known him when his hairline was fuller, and his confidence less cruel. Still, Claire hoped she was wrong. Hope, she would later realize, could be a very intelligent form of denial. One Thursday afternoon, after dropping off a folder at Emma's school for a college prep meeting, Claire drove downtown to pick up a birthday gift for her sister. It was raining lightly, the kind of fine gray rain that made storefront windows glow and traffic crawl. She parked 2 blocks from the boutique and hurried along the sidewalk, holding her purse over her head because she had forgotten an umbrella. That was when she saw Daniel. He stood outside a cafe beneath a striped awning, smiling at a woman with dark hair tucked into a camel coat. He was not smiling the way he smiled at neighbors or clients. This smile was younger, easier, almost boyish, and the sight of it hurt Claire before the kiss even happened. The woman touched his chest. Daniel leaned down and kissed her. Not quickly. Not accidentally. Not like a mistake. Claire stopped walking so abruptly that a man behind her nearly bumped into her shoulder. The rain tapped against her hair, her face, her hands. Across the street, Daniel laughed at something the woman said, then placed his hand at the small of her back as they went inside together. Claire did not move for several seconds. Her body wanted drama, her blood wanted noise. A part of her wanted to cross the street, shove open the cafe door, and demand that Daniel look at her in front of everyone. But another part of her, older and quieter and far more frightened, understood that the moment she confronted him, she would be giving up the only advantage she had: information. So she turned around. She walked back to her car, sat behind the steering wheel, and stared through the windshield until the world blurred into silver lines of rain. Then she drove home carefully, obeying every traffic signal, because grief did not excuse carelessness, and Emma still needed her mother to arrive alive. That evening, Daniel came home with a lie already prepared. "Client dinner ran long," he said, hanging his coat by the back door. Claire was stirring marinara sauce at the stove. Emma sat at the island with her laptop open, earbuds in, tapping a pencil against her chemistry notes. "Downtown?" Claire asked. Daniel's hand paused on the coat hook. "Yeah," he said. "Why?" "No reason. I thought I saw your car near High Street earlier." His face changed for less than a second, but she saw it. Annoyance, calculation, then ease. "Probably did. We had meetings all over," he said, and kissed Emma on top of the head. "How's school?" Claire turned back to the sauce before he could see her eyes. The most painful discovery came 2 weeks later, and it did not come from a kiss. It came from his own mouth. Daniel had taken a call in the garage, the way he often did now, but he had not shut the mudroom door all the way. Claire had been carrying a basket of clean towels through the hallway when she heard him laugh. "No, she'll never leave me," he said. Claire stopped. The towels grew heavy in her arms. Daniel's voice was low, amused, intimate, in a way that made her skin tighten. "Claire? Come on. She gave up too much. She wouldn't even know where to start. Besides, she likes the house, the neighborhood, the whole mom routine. She'll be upset, sure, but she'll adjust." There was a pause, then another laugh. "I know her." Claire stood there until her fingers went numb around the laundry basket. The affair had been a wound, but that sentence was something colder. Daniel was not just betraying her, he was depending on her defeat. He had taken every meal, every sacrifice, every year she spent holding the family together, and he had turned it into proof that she was trapped. That night, Claire waited until everyone was asleep, then went into the bathroom, turned on the shower, sat on the closed toilet lid, and cried with her hand over her mouth. She cried for the young woman she had been, for the career she had paused, for the marriage she had defended long after Daniel had stopped deserving that defense. She cried until the grief emptied out and left something hard and quiet behind. The next morning, she woke before sunrise. Daniel was asleep beside her, breathing heavily, one arm flung over the blanket as though the world had never once asked him to account for himself. Claire looked at him for a long moment, and the sadness was still there, but it no longer ruled her. She made coffee. She packed Emma's lunch. She stood at the kitchen window while the sky softened over the quiet suburban street, and she made herself one promise. No one would ever mistake her love for weakness again. By 9 o'clock, she had called Margaret Ellis, a family law attorney recommended years earlier by a woman from church who had gone through a difficult divorce and emerged with her dignity intact. Claire almost hung up before the receptionist answered, but she forced herself to stay on the line. At the consultation, Margaret listened carefully, her pen moving across a yellow legal pad. "I don't know what I want yet," Claire admitted. "I just know I can't be blind anymore." Margaret nodded. "That's enough for today." Claire looked down at her hands. "Should I confront him?" "Not yet," Margaret said. "Not unless you're ready for every possible reaction. Anger, manipulation, financial pressure, sudden remorse. People show you who they are when they think they're losing control." Claire absorbed that slowly. Margaret leaned forward, her expression kind but firm. "Don't rush. Let him make the first move." So Claire went home. She cooked dinner. She asked Emma about school. She smiled politely when Daniel complained about a supplier, and she did not mention the woman in the camel coat, the hotel charge, the jewelry receipt, or the sentence that had finally broken something cleanly inside her. She waited. And while Daniel mistook her silence for surrender, Claire began to rebuild. Waiting turned out to be far more difficult than leaving would have been. There were mornings when Claire wanted to place the hotel receipt on the breakfast table and ask Daniel whether the lie tasted different after enough repetition. There were evenings when she watched him laugh at something on his phone and wondered if Vanessa knew he still kissed his daughter goodnight before disappearing into the guest room he claimed he needed for late-night work. But every time anger tempted her to act, she remembered Margaret Ellis's advice. "Don't rush. Let him make the first move." It became less of a strategy and more of a discipline. Claire stopped thinking in terms of surviving one marriage and started thinking in terms of building one independent life. The consulting work that had begun as a cautious experiment gradually became something real. One satisfied client referred another. A regional medical practice hired her to streamline scheduling procedures after years of inefficient administration. A rehabilitation center contracted her to review compliance processes before an upcoming audit. She worked from a small desk she set up in the corner of the family room, usually while Daniel was traveling and Emma was at school. The income wasn't spectacular. It didn't need to be. Every payment represented something far more valuable than the amount deposited into her account. It represented choice. She opened a separate savings account in her own name and directed every consulting payment there. She tracked every dollar with the same careful attention she had once given the household budget. She resisted the temptation to touch the money, even when the family furnace needed repairs, or Emma unexpectedly needed new tires after one of them was damaged by a nail. Daniel paid those expenses without hesitation, never imagining that Claire could have contributed. That assumption suited her just fine. Meanwhile, after Emma went upstairs each evening, Claire returned to studying. Healthcare regulations had evolved during the years she stayed home. Software systems had changed. Reporting requirements had become more sophisticated. She enrolled in online certification programs, completed continuing education modules, attended virtual professional seminars, and filled notebook after notebook with updated procedures and management strategies. There were nights when her eyes burned from staring at the computer screen. There were mornings when she questioned whether anyone would ever hire a 42-year-old woman returning after so many years away. Then an email would arrive from a former colleague. "Heard you're consulting again. We'd love to talk." Another. "Your recommendations helped us reduce patient wait times by almost 20%. Little by little, the confidence Daniel believed she had lost forever quietly returned. She never mentioned any of it. Daniel barely noticed. He was far more interested in talking about himself. His latest promotion gave him even greater authority within the company, and with that authority came larger bonuses, nicer restaurants, and an increasing certainty that the rules simply did not apply to him. At neighborhood cookouts, he spoke a little louder than everyone else. At family gatherings, he interrupted people without realizing it. When friends complimented Claire on dinner or decorating the house, Daniel would chuckle and say, "She keeps everything running while I bring home the paycheck." Most people laughed politely. Claire simply smiled. Only she knew how outdated that sentence had become. Following Margaret's guidance, Claire also began organizing every legitimate financial record connected to their marriage. Nothing secret. Nothing illegal. Everything was information both spouses had every legal right to access. She created neatly labeled folders for tax returns dating back several years. She gathered retirement account statements, mortgage documents, insurance policies, investment summaries, property tax records, and monthly household expenses. She created spreadsheets showing ordinary family spending alongside unusual expenditures that seemed unrelated to household needs. Several expensive restaurant charges. Repeated hotel stays that did not align with business travel. Luxury purchases Claire had never seen. She did not speculate about them. She simply documented dates and amounts. Facts required no emotion. Margaret reviewed everything during their periodic meetings. "You've done excellent work," the attorney said one afternoon, carefully closing another folder. "This is exactly how preparation should look." Claire frowned slightly. "It feels strange." "In what way?" "I almost feel guilty." Margaret leaned back in her chair. "Because you're preparing?" Claire nodded. "It feels like I'm hiding something." Margaret smiled gently. "Claire, you're educating yourself. You're organizing financial records you already own jointly. You're earning your own income. You're updating your career. None of that is dishonest." She paused. "Preparation isn't revenge." Those words stayed with Claire long after she left the office. "Preparation isn't revenge." She repeated them whenever guilt tried to creep into her thoughts. Meanwhile, Daniel's confidence continued expanding until it bordered on carelessness. One Saturday afternoon, while grilling hamburgers for neighbors, he joked about finally buying the sports car he'd always wanted. "You only live once," he laughed, flipping burgers. "Might as well enjoy the money while we're young enough." Claire glanced toward the driveway where their sensible SUV sat beside his luxury sedan. Years earlier, Daniel would have talked about paying off the mortgage faster or contributing more to Emma's college fund. Now he talked about appearances. Another evening, while browsing vacation websites, he casually mentioned wanting to spend more time in Miami because the energy there is better. Claire recognized the city immediately. Several unexplained credit card charges had originated there during one of his supposed conferences. She simply nodded. "That sounds nice." He mistook her calmness for agreement. In truth, Claire was watching something important happen. Daniel was becoming increasingly comfortable living two separate lives. That comfort made him sloppy. He no longer bothered inventing particularly convincing explanations. Sometimes he simply announced another business dinner without offering details. Other times he disappeared for an entire weekend under the excuse of client meetings, assuming Claire would accept whatever story he provided. She rarely asked questions anymore. At first, Daniel seemed pleased. Eventually, he stopped noticing she had stopped asking. Emma, however, noticed changes of a different kind. One evening, she found Claire reviewing notes at the dining room table. "I thought you were done with homework forever," Emma teased, setting down her backpack. Claire laughed softly. "So did I." Emma picked up one of the textbooks. "Healthcare Operations Management?" "I'm updating some certifications." Emma looked surprised. "Are you thinking about going back to work?" Claire considered the question carefully before answering. I think I'm remembering who I was before I forgot. Emma smiled. I think you'd be really good at it. That simple sentence meant more than Emma realized. It reminded Claire that her daughter had never seen sacrifice as weakness. Only Daniel had. The months continued passing. Consulting assignments became steady enough that Claire no longer worried whether another project would arrive. Her professional network quietly expanded. Her savings account steadily grew. Her confidence returned not in dramatic leaps, but in hundreds of ordinary decisions made correctly. She slept better. She worried less. She stopped measuring her value by Daniel's attention. One afternoon, after reviewing updated financial records together, Margaret closed the final folder and folded her hands. I've been practicing family law for 26 years, she said. Most people walk into my office after a crisis. They're frightened, overwhelmed, and forced to make major decisions while they're emotionally exhausted. Claire nodded. I know. You've done the opposite. Margaret looked directly at her. You've rebuilt your foundation before the earthquake. For the first time since discovering Daniel's affair, Claire allowed herself to imagine a future she didn't fear. Not because she expected Daniel to change, but because she no longer needed him to. As their meeting came to an end, Margaret walked her to the reception area. Before Claire reached the door, the attorney spoke one final sentence. The day he files for divorce. She waited until Claire turned back. That is the day we respond. Claire understood exactly what she meant. She wasn't waiting for revenge. She wasn't waiting for Daniel to fail. She was waiting for him to make the decision he believed would leave her powerless. He had no idea that every month he delayed had given her another month to become stronger. And when that day finally arrived, it wouldn't be the beginning of her downfall. It would be the beginning of her freedom. The silence that followed Claire's signature seemed to drain the confidence out of the room. Daniel stared at the divorce papers as though someone had switched them with a different set while he wasn't looking. Only moments earlier, he had been sitting comfortably at the kitchen table, certain he was directing the conversation. Now his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally to something that looked remarkably like fear. Claire, he said slowly, what did you just do? She folded her hands neatly in front of her. I signed. I can see that. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the composure he was trying so hard to maintain. I mean, why? Claire tilted her head just enough to meet his eyes. Because you asked me to. That isn't what I meant. No, she replied calmly. It isn't. Daniel pushed the papers farther away, as though physical distance might somehow undo the ink drying on the page. This was supposed to be a conversation. You gave me two options. I expected we'd discuss them. You already made your decision before you walked into this kitchen. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then stood and began pacing across the hardwood floor. This isn't happening the way it's supposed to. Claire almost felt sorry for him. Almost. For months, she had imagined this conversation in dozens of different ways. She had pictured anger, tears, accusations, even relief. She had never imagined Daniel would be the one unraveling. You don't understand, he said. I understand perfectly. No, you don't. He rubbed both hands across his face. Claire, people don't just sign. She couldn't help noticing the irony. You believed I couldn't leave. Daniel froze. The sentence landed harder than she expected. His eyes narrowed. What does that mean? Claire looked toward the kitchen window, where early evening sunlight stretched across the backyard. Emma would be home from debate practice within the hour. She was grateful they were having this conversation before their daughter walked through the front door. It means, Claire said quietly, you've been making assumptions about me for a very long time. Daniel searched her face. Then something shifted behind his eyes. How long have you known? Claire didn't answer immediately. She stood, gathered her coffee mug from the counter, rinsed it carefully beneath the faucet, dried it with a dish towel, and returned it to the cabinet. Only then did she turn around. Long enough. His face lost what little color remained. You knew? Yes. For how long? About 6 months. The words seemed to knock the air out of him. That's impossible. No. You would have said something. I chose not to. Why? Claire met his gaze steadily. Because you never listened. The kitchen became unbearably quiet. Daniel sank back into his chair. You knew about Vanessa? Yes. The hotel? Yes. The trips? Yes. He stared at the tabletop, replaying months of conversations in his mind, searching for clues he had missed. You acted completely normal. I acted with dignity. Those words stung. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't insulted him. She had simply stated a fact. Daniel remembered every evening she had calmly asked whether he wanted more coffee, every birthday dinner she had organized for Emma, every holiday gathering she had hosted with effortless grace. He had interpreted her composure as ignorance. Instead, it had been discipline. I don't understand, he whispered. I know. You should have confronted me. Claire gave a sad smile. For what purpose? So we could have talked. She let that sentence hang between them. Daniel, she said gently, you stopped talking to me a long time ago. He looked away. For the first time in years, there was no clever response waiting on the tip of his tongue. His phone vibrated against the table. The screen lit up. Vanessa. Daniel instinctively reached for it, then stopped. Claire noticed. She said nothing. The phone vibrated again before falling silent. Daniel turned it face down. It was the first time in months he had ignored her call. But it was also far too late. Claire picked up her purse. I have an appointment. What appointment? With my attorney. His head snapped upward. Attorney? Yes. You already have a lawyer? I've had one. How long? Since shortly after I learned the truth. Daniel leaned back as though physically struck. This has all been planned? Claire shook her head. No, you've been planning this for months. I've been preparing. What's the difference? The difference, Claire answered evenly, is that preparation protects your future. Revenge tries to destroy someone else's. He stared at her. She continued. I never wanted to destroy you. Then why? I wanted to make sure Emma and I would be all right if this day ever came. Daniel suddenly remembered all the evenings Claire had spent working on her laptop. The online courses. The phone calls she had taken in the family room. The occasional consulting meetings she had described as helping former colleagues. He had barely paid attention. You went back to work. A little at first. And now? Enough. His stomach tightened. You don't need me financially, Claire answered honestly. I needed you as my husband. The sentence hurt far more than an accusation ever could. Daniel lowered his head. He finally understood what he had never bothered asking. Claire hadn't stayed home because she lacked ability. She had stayed because together they had decided their family needed one parent with flexibility while Emma grew up. He had mistaken sacrifice for dependence. He had mistaken partnership for weakness. And now the foundation beneath every assumption he had made was collapsing. Claire walked toward the front door. Wait. She stopped but did not turn around. I can fix this. She closed her eyes briefly. No, Daniel. I'll end it. She remained silent. I'll tell Vanessa it's over. Still nothing. We can start counseling. Claire slowly faced him again. Can I ask you something? He nodded eagerly. When you put those papers on the table today, before I signed, were you planning to end your relationship with her? His shoulders sagged. No. Were you hoping to rebuild our marriage? Another silence. Finally, he whispered, No. You wanted me to accept both of you. He couldn't deny it. Yes. Claire nodded once. Then nothing changed because I signed. Daniel looked confused. You're only asking for another chance because your plan failed. He flinched. She continued softly. If I had cried, if I had begged, if I had agreed to your arrangement, would you have respected me more? He couldn't answer, because they both knew the truth. He wouldn't have. The doorbell rang. Emma. Claire glanced toward the entryway. We're not discussing this in front of her. Daniel stood quickly. What happens now? She looked at the signed papers, resting quietly on the kitchen table. Now, she said, my attorney files our response. Over the following days, everything moved exactly as Margaret Ellis had prepared her for. The signed documents were delivered to the law office that same afternoon. Claire's legal response was filed promptly and professionally. Margaret submitted the standard requests for complete financial disclosure required during the divorce process. She requested updated records for bank accounts, retirement funds, investment portfolios, and employment compensation. Temporary measures were also sought to ensure that significant marital assets could not be improperly transferred or hidden, while negotiations were pending. Everything followed ordinary legal procedure. Nothing dramatic, nothing vindictive. Just careful, lawful steps designed to protect both parties until the process was complete. Daniel had assumed he would control the pace. Instead, he found himself responding to deadlines, gathering financial records, answering routine legal requests, and explaining expenditures that he had never expected anyone to examine closely. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after serving the papers, he met Claire in the kitchen as she finished loading the dishwasher. He looked exhausted. Older. The confidence that once filled every room had quietly disappeared. Can I ask you one thing? Claire nodded. Why didn't you stop me? She dried her hands slowly before answering. Because Daniel... She looked at him with neither anger nor satisfaction. You never listened. The weeks that followed unfolded with far less drama than either Daniel or Claire had imagined, yet they carried a weight that neither courtroom arguments nor angry confrontations could have matched. Margaret had prepared Claire for that too. Most divorces, she had explained during one of their meetings, are not decided by one explosive moment. They're decided by hundreds of reasonable conversations, careful documents, and practical decisions. That proved to be exactly what happened. The mediation sessions were professional and at times emotionally exhausting. There were discussions about the house, retirement accounts, insurance policies, and savings. There were spreadsheets, appraisals, and schedules. Every financial record Claire had quietly organized months earlier allowed the conversations to stay grounded in facts rather than accusations. Daniel's attorney occasionally challenged certain valuations or requested additional documentation, but there were no hidden surprises. Everything was already there. Every tax return, every mortgage statement, every retirement contribution, every legitimate household expense. Claire answered questions calmly. She never exaggerated. She never tried to embarrass Daniel by bringing unnecessary details about the affair into the negotiations. The infidelity had explained why the marriage ended, but it did not need to become the center of every legal discussion. Margaret noticed. After one particularly long mediation session, she gathered her files and smiled. You've done something many people struggle to do. Claire looked up. You separated your pain from your decisions. Claire thought about that during the drive home. The pain had been real. It still was. But pain was no longer driving the car. Emma was. Not literally, of course. At 16, she still had a learner's permit and preferred Claire behind the wheel whenever traffic became heavy. But every decision Claire made now was measured against one simple question. Would this create a healthier future for Emma? That question answered almost everything. Emma had not learned about the affair all at once. Claire and Daniel agreed, perhaps for the first time in years, that she deserved honesty without unnecessary cruelty. One Sunday afternoon, the three of them sat together in the living room. Daniel spoke first. We've decided we're getting divorced. Emma's eyes immediately filled with tears. Is it because of another woman? Daniel closed his eyes. There was no point pretending. Yes. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Emma looked from her father to her mother, searching desperately for someone to tell her this was all a misunderstanding. Instead, Claire simply reached across the couch and held her daughter's hand. Emma turned back toward Daniel. How long? Daniel swallowed. Several months. You lied to Mom. Yes. You lied to me. Another pause. Yes. Emma nodded once. Not angrily. Sadly. I don't think I know you anymore. Those 7 words accomplished what no legal filing ever could. Daniel looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. Over the next several months, Emma remained polite to her father, but something fundamental had changed. She still visited him according to the parenting schedule they developed together. She still answered his calls. She still wished him happy birthday. But trust, Claire realized, could not simply be repaired because someone regretted breaking it. It had to be rebuilt slowly. If it could be rebuilt at all. Daniel never argued about child support or educational expenses. He attended every mediation session on time. He complied with every financial disclosure request. Somewhere during the process, the arrogance that had defined him during those final months of marriage quietly disappeared. One afternoon, after signing another set of settlement documents, he found Claire outside the mediator's office. "I've been thinking about something," he said. Claire waited. "I kept telling myself I lost my marriage because I had an affair." He looked down at the parking lot. "But that's not really true." She remained silent. "I lost it long before that." For the first time since everything began, Claire believed he was telling the truth without trying to earn forgiveness. "You stopped being my partner," she said gently. "I know. You stopped respecting the life we built together." "I know. And eventually, you stopped seeing me." Daniel nodded. "I thought providing money meant I was carrying the family." Claire gave a small, tired smile. "We were both carrying it." He laughed softly. "I just didn't notice your side of the weight." There was nothing else to say. Some conversations arrived years too late. The divorce became final on a bright autumn morning. No celebration followed. No dramatic speeches. Claire left the courthouse carrying a slim folder containing the final documents. She sat inside her car for several minutes without starting the engine. For 17 years, she had been Claire Morgan, wife. Now she was simply Claire. The realization felt strange, then unexpectedly peaceful. She drove home by a longer route, passing the park where Emma had learned to ride her bicycle, the elementary school where she'd volunteered in the library for nearly a decade, and the small neighborhood bakery that still sold cinnamon rolls every Saturday morning. The world had not changed. She had. Over the following months, her consulting business continued growing beyond anything she had expected. Former clients recommended her to larger healthcare organizations. She accepted projects that challenged her professionally and reminded her how much she genuinely loved solving complicated operational problems. For the first time in many years, she wasn't introducing herself as someone else's wife. She was introducing herself as herself. One evening, nearly a year after Daniel had placed those divorce papers on the kitchen table, Claire and Emma sat together on the back porch, watching the last light settle over the neighborhood. Emma was filling out college applications. Claire was reviewing notes for a meeting the next morning. The air smelled faintly of fallen leaves. After several quiet minutes, Emma closed her laptop. "Mom?" Claire looked up. "Were you scared?" Claire smiled softly. "Every single day." Emma studied her mother's face. "Then why did you sign the papers?" Claire looked across the backyard toward the old maple tree Daniel had planted when Emma was born. Its branches had weathered countless storms, dropping leaves every autumn only to grow them again each spring. "I didn't sign because I was giving up." She paused, choosing words her daughter would remember long after this conversation ended. "I signed because I finally understood the difference between holding on and holding yourself back." Emma listened carefully. "I loved your father for a long time," Claire continued. "There's nothing embarrassing about that. Loving someone isn't weakness." "No. Staying after respect disappears, that's different." Emma nodded slowly. Claire reached over and squeezed her hand. "I wasn't giving up." Another gentle pause. "I was finally setting myself free." Emma leaned against her shoulder, the way she used to as a little girl after difficult days at school. Neither of them spoke again for several minutes. They didn't need to. The quiet no longer felt lonely. It felt safe. Months later, Claire happened to pass Daniel at one of Emma's school events. He looked older than his years, but calmer too. They exchanged polite conversation about Emma's college plans, laughed briefly over a story from her childhood, and then went their separate ways. There was no bitterness left to carry. Only consequences. Daniel had not lost everything. He still had his career. He still had his health. He still had opportunities to rebuild his relationship with Emma, provided he earned that privilege patiently. But he had lost the marriage he once assumed could never end. He had lost the unquestioned trust of his daughter. He had lost the quiet respect that Claire had freely given him for 17 years. Those losses had not been inflicted by revenge. They had grown naturally from his own choices. As for Claire, she gained something no settlement agreement could list among financial assets. She regained her confidence, her independence, her peace of mind. Most importantly, she rediscovered the woman she had once believed disappeared beneath years of sacrifice. She hadn't disappeared. She had simply been waiting for the chance to stand again. Life, Claire eventually realized, has a quiet way of balancing itself. Pride may feel powerful for a season, manipulation may create the illusion of control, and betrayal may seem like an easy shortcut to happiness. Yet none of those things can build a future worth living. Patience can. Preparation can. Integrity can. Self-respect can. The greatest victory is rarely watching someone else fall. The greatest victory is walking calmly toward a better life while they finally learn that every choice carries its own consequence. True revenge isn't destroying someone else's life, it's refusing to let someone else control yours. Pride, manipulation, and betrayal may seem powerful in the moment, but patience, preparation, integrity, and self-respect build a far stronger future. Claire didn't win because Daniel lost. She won because she chose dignity over desperation, preparation over panic, and peace over bitterness. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't watching someone face the consequences of their choices. It's quietly walking toward a better life while they finally realize what they willingly walked away from. If Claire's story touched your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever seen someone mistake kindness for weakness? Or have you ever had to find the courage to walk away from a relationship that no longer respected you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story may encourage someone else who needs hope today. And if you enjoy powerful family dramas about resilience, betrayal, second chances, and personal strength, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never let anyone convince you that your kindness is the same as weakness.